Now I'd like to welcome to the programme Stephen McBride, who's Director of Services with aware.ie. So thanks for coming on the programme, Stephen.
Thank you very much, Patrick. It's lovely to be here.
Good. Aware.ie, it's basically to do with mental health, isn't it? I suppose I could start with giving us a basic idea of what you do.
Yeah. So at Aware, what we do at Aware is we provide support, information and education services to people who are experiencing depression, bipolar disorder and other mood-related conditions. So people living with a diagnosis of depression or bipolar disorder. And also we work with people who are experiencing anxiety and stress and conditions related to their mood. And what we do in that regard, we have a wide range of support services and education programs, to help people kind of work through their experience of depression. We're very much open to meeting people where they're at. And what I mean by that is that we don't have a waiting list. We don't have a screening kind of function in the organization, which means that people can go onto our website, as you've said it there, Patrick, and register for one of our programs, or also register their place at one of our groups. And we have a support line service that is a free phone number that people can ring. So we have a whole range of, as I said, services and programs for people experiencing depression.
Right. We can go into a little more detail about the specific areas. Last year, or 2022, there's some numbers about the number of people you reached or got in contact with you.
Yeah. So in 2022, we had close to 40,000 people right around the country reach out to us for support or for our education services, and who also would have attended some of our information services, which are provided through a monthly webinar series that we have people experts in specific fields in the area of mental health right across the continuum, people talking about the link between physical health and mental health, people talking about anxiety and how to support yourself through that experience. So we've supported close to, as I say, 40,000 people last year right across the country.
And I suppose people's family would extend beyond people specifically in need, wouldn't it? People's families. Would you be contacted sometimes by a family member who might be worried about somebody?
Certainly, indeed, and that's one of the services we're most proud of, because very often the forgotten voice in all of this in relation to mental health is the loved one or the supporter of a person with depression or bipolar disorder. So we have a specific 4-week program which is called our Relatives and Friends program, which is an educational program for people to come and learn new ways of coping themselves with the fact that they're in a relationship with someone who has depression, or their son has depression, or daughter has depression or bipolar disorder. So we have a great 4-week program in that regard, and also a support group for relatives and friends. So we do very much speak to that constituency too, very much a silent or an unheard voice in the whole area of mental health.
Right. So when somebody rings up the support line, maybe you could talk us through the process involved.
Yeah.
And therefore make contact.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. So on the support line last year, of those 40,000 unique visits or unique contacts that we had to Aware, close to 20,000 were on the support line. So we handled or answered close to 20,000 calls to the support line in 2022, and will answer as close to that number again this year. The signs would suggest that. So what happens when a person rings the support line, which the phone number is 1800 80 48 48, and it's open 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. every day of the year, 365 days of the year, that they would be received on the line by an Aware trained volunteer who is there to empathically listen to them and to provide a non-judgmental space where a person can speak about their experience of their mood, or what's distressing them, or what's going on in their life that has led them to call Aware, that experience of depression or bipolar or anxiety. And then to tease that out with the Aware trained volunteer who will listen to them, and then perhaps give some, emotional support through that listening, and then perhaps some practical support by highlighting or discussing some options that may be available to that caller. And all of those calls are held within our kind of best practice guidelines of within a maximum of 30 minutes. So it's a very contained call, and it's about supporting and informing a person with depression about what maybe options they have, but also a kind, compassionate and listening voice at the other end of the line.
Yeah, I suppose people would be sort of hesitant or reluctant. Maybe when they ring up, they might be in two minds. Did I do the right thing by ringing up? And it must be a specific skill to kind of draw them out without making them feel embarrassed or anything like that.
Sure, Patrick. Yeah, and we're very conscious that the experience around mental health, that there's, it's still quite a substantial amount of stigma, and whether that's held at an individual level or the experience, and stigma and shame are close enough bedfellows in terms of, what people carry in terms of experiencing depression or bipolar disorder. So very much, on the support line, the aware trained volunteer will be able to, provide that space for a person to speak and put words on their experience and to describe what's going on for them or the predicament that they're facing, all the while listening and conveying an atmosphere that they are listening to them, empathically and non-judgmentally. But it can be very hard, of course, for anyone to pick up the phone to any service, including Aware, for the very first time. And it's a great act of courage and bravery for any person to do that for the first time, to speak about what's going on in their mind, because by speaking about it, there's a chance that something might change or develop or renew itself, in time as a person works through their experience of depression.
Yeah. And so the three kind of areas, anxiety, depression, and bipolar disorder, there would be differences obviously in how you'd handle each of those three kind of broad headings, wouldn't there?
Well, I suppose the differences maybe are more prevalent in terms of how we would deliver our educational programs. So we have a specific educational program for people with bipolar disorder. In relation to the support line or in relation to the support group offering we have, it's very much based on listening to a person and providing them with some kind of supportive framework that they feel as though in the group or on the line that they're being heard and listened to. Now, obviously, the conditions themselves, depression is part of bipolar disorder. People experience depressive episodes within that bipolar diagnosis, but also experience elated or manic phases as well. But depression is part of bipolar disorder indeed. So really, I suppose what I'm getting at is, yes, the conditions are different from what you've outlined in your question, and yet the support structure that our volunteer-led services provide, because we're a volunteer-led organisation, would very much be in tune with trying to connect with a person and listen to them describe what's going on for them in their lives.
Right. And the support and self-care groups, how many would you have throughout the country?
So we have presently we're operating 20 support groups on a weekly basis, and we have 10 in-person groups which are provided right around the country. 4 of them are provided in Dublin, 2 in Cork, and then we're pretty much around the seaboard. Then we have a group in Waterford, a group in Kerry, a group in Limerick, and a group in Galway. So we have 10 support group offerings in person, 9, and this was maybe a dividend from COVID because it increases the accessibility or reduces the barriers for people accessing care, in that the Zoom group offering is very, significant to people now, or our online group offering. And we have 9 Zoom support group meetings, and 1 phone-in group meeting. And the phone-in group meeting takes place on a Sunday. And that's very much maybe going back to my earlier point about perhaps stigma or shame, that a person maybe, coming forward for the first time prefers the idea that their anonymity is held by the very fact that they're speaking over the phone, and that we always just work on a first name basis. Yeah. So a person is attending a support group over the phone has that kind of safety and security, which perhaps is very important to them, that they're not seen, for want of a better word, in person, and yet they are seen and heard psychologically and emotionally in terms of being listened to and supported by our volunteers.
Yeah, obviously confidentiality would be a crucial kind of requirement, wouldn't it, in the kind of work that you do?
Without a doubt, Patrick. Yes, indeed. Now, obviously, confidentiality within normal limits. If a person is at risk of harm, to themselves or at risk of harming another person, or if there's a child at
Oh,
risk of
yes.
harm, they're the limits of confidentiality. So confidentiality is held within normal limits.
Right.
So any adult coming forward for support or information or education can expect to be, greeted in a very professional manner. And yet also we have ethical and professional requirements that we have to uphold and administer, I suppose, in terms of the delivery of our work. And that's what is important in terms of confidentiality. And yet, if a person doesn't disclose those three areas as such, disclose an incident in terms of perhaps an earlier experience of trauma or abuse in childhood, that very much is, outside of the limits of confidentiality if we had an identified person who was harming a child. But other than that,
Yeah.
confidentiality is respected in the aware services. Yes.
Yeah. And you have an annual mental health week every year, and the last one was in October, was it?
Yes, so Aware Mental Health Week. So that takes place over a week, generally speaking, the second week of October, and it links in with World Mental Health Day, which is the 10th of October every year. So we have built on that and built on the idea, and our communications team are very, much to the fore in developing plans and ideas around Aware Mental Health Week, in which we kind of try to build awareness and understanding about depression and bipolar disorder, which serves to break down barriers and serves to destigmatize, because we're very much in the business of trying to destigmatize people who are experiencing mental health conditions. So that's part of the strategy in terms of the Aware Mental Health Week.
Yeah. And you've kind of four headings in the childhood, adolescence, adulthood, older age, and obviously there would be different requirements at each of those four stages.
Oh, certainly, yeah. So obviously, depression can be experienced by any person right across the lifespan. And yet, obviously, we work with adults, so our service offering is for people who are 18 and older. But childhood experiences, especially if there's significant adversity, perhaps in childhood, can lead to depression being experienced, or be a diagnosis or a depressive episode for a person in adulthood. And the situational factors and the life events that we all experience, can lead to a depressive episode or that experience of depression, as I say. So thinking about, the developmental trajectory of ourselves throughout life and the milestones and growing up in our 20s and the different life events that happen to us, that's very much was the thinking in October in terms of developing, depression across the lifespan as it pertains to childhood, adolescence, adulthood, and late adulthood or our elderly years.
And I suppose in old age, the loneliness would be a factor which would arise quite often, I'd imagine. Yeah.
Indeed, Patrick. And I suppose, you're tuning into that aspect of loss and loss of vigor or loss of power, and something, in relation to the lifespan aspect of it, with, loss of friends, relations, all of that through death, so that can tend and to a person being isolated, perhaps, obviously isolation and loneliness, there's a link between them, but they're subtly and significantly different as well too in their makeup. But very much, in elderly in elderly adulthood, if I put it that way, that or as it's called, people maybe as a senior citizen level, would experience, that sense of isolation and loneliness. And we would hear from people contacting the support line and coming to our support groups, describing that experience themselves.
Yeah, of course, you'd have bereavement, don't you? Wives losing their husbands and husbands their wives and all that. Yeah.
Yes.
You provide a lot of information, don't you, through your website and so on, about understanding and managing depression, bipolar disorder, and anxiety, and building information on building resilience and coping with those challenges.
Yes, indeed. So the information services we provide, Patrick, are specific to, generally speaking, they're linked to the webinars, that monthly series of webinars that I mentioned a little bit earlier on in our discussion. And secondary to that, I suppose, we have a wide repository of information and different blogs that I have written some, and my colleague, my clinical director, Dr. Susan Brannock, has written, which provide great kind of information, and information can be very supportive and also educational. So we really see those three pillars of support, information, and education as being central to our mission, to providing that to, people experiencing depression and their loved ones. So the information series, that webinar series, that we have on a monthly basis, is very, we would see it at being trying to develop themes around that are very relevant societally and also to people who are experiencing depression, as we plan for next year into 2024 about what we might do with that webinar series. But giving that information can be so empowering to a person who's experiencing depression,
Yeah. And you have schools programs and workplace programs as well.
Yes. So the schools program, that's the only area where we work with people who are under the age of 18. So to senior cycle students, so people perhaps in 5th or 6th year, we go in and provide a program based on the principles of cognitive behavioral therapy. It's a 4-week program again, to senior cycle students about developing that resilience or developing kind of an understanding of how our thinking can lead to, if we shift some of our thinking, from maybe the unhelpful or unhealthy thought patterns that we can all engage in, that something can shift perhaps in our behavior. So the link in taking action and empowering our own behavior, which has a fundamental kind of shift in terms of our mood, and developing and working through that experience of depression. And yes, because we're a volunteer-led organization, we have a small staff team, and because we receive, our funding through the generosity of the public and public donations, as well as through corporate partnerships that we have, we raise up to 70% of our income comes through that fundraising department, and 30% or so, just circa 30% comes from the state, that we work with different organizations, which has a dual function of building awareness about depression and also supporting staff members, to develop their own mental health, their understanding of their mental health and protecting their mental health, because mental health isn't specific just to people who experience or are diagnosed with depression. We all have mental health and have to consider how we best look after ourselves, so that applies to people in the workplace, in whatever that workplace may be.
As we're in the run up to Christmas, as was Christmas, it's often said can be a time of great anxiety for people. So would you get a kind of a spike in your calls around Christmas time?
Yeah, we can tend to. Something, we can, of course. And generally speaking, going back to that earlier point, around Christmas time, people talk about, because it's I suppose at a societal level, and maybe what we see in the television or hear on the radio, Christmas isn't like that for a lot of people,
Yeah.
A lot of people have quite mixed feelings about Christmas, so, what we read and what we see isn't necessarily the experience of a lot of people out there. So I think it's important to highlight that and note that, and a lot of people linked to that are experiencing isolation and loneliness apropos Christmas, and because of Christmas just being around the corner, and it can be a very difficult and challenging time. So in answer to your question around a spike in calls, we're prepared for that with our volunteers, yet it's hard to know because, our services are provided on the demand of the service user or the caller to the line or the visitor to the support group or the group attendee, et cetera, et cetera. So, we anticipate a spike, but also, it just depends on a person's and individual's mood,
Yeah. If people wanted to volunteer, how would they go about it?
Yeah, so interesting question, Patrick, and we seek volunteers from all walks of life, and generally there's 3 categories in which we see volunteers coming forward. Perhaps people who have had the lived experience of depression or bipolar disorder. Perhaps they have a family member or friend who has experienced a mental health condition, whether it's bipolar disorder or depression, and they're intrigued about, providing that support to other people or being of service or taking the time out of their lives, to come forward and volunteer with Aware. And the third category of people are people maybe who are interested in the whole area of mental health and want to further develop their own knowledge and understanding of it, and there's great tangible personal and professional benefits from becoming a volunteer in terms of learning new skills about listening, about empathy, about adopting a non-judgmental attitude to people, you know. So there's great benefits to becoming a volunteer for people from all walks of life. So basically, the information, Patrick, would be that if anyone from listening to this interview is interested in volunteering with Aware, please go onto our website, and the area of it is, you know, the work with us, you know, is the area on the website, you know, to look at aware.ie, or else you could send an email to info@aware.ie, because we're currently recruiting volunteers to provide services to people with depression.
Okay, we're coming to the end now. And is there anything else you'd like to add, Stephen, before we finish?
I suppose just to say to wish your listeners a happy Christmas, and also to say that, and I've mentioned it, if people out there listening to this interview are experiencing depression or bipolar disorder, please reach out to us, you know, at aware.ie, or on our support line 1800 80 48 48, and you'll receive a warm, empathic and listening response. A person will seek to understand and hear you, you know. So we're very conscious that it can be tricky for people to pick up the phone or to send an email, but you know, you can rest assured that you'll receive a supportive response if you do that. And if you're experiencing low mood, or you notice a change in your mental health, don't hesitate to reach out to us at Aware, and we'd be delighted to hear from you.
Okay, right. Thanks very much, Stephen, for that.
You're very welcome.